Right, our reading this morning is from John 9, 1 through to 12. As he was passing along, Jesus saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples questioned him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but rather that the works of God might be made manifest in him. It is necessary for us to perform the works of the one who has sent me while it is day. The night comes when no one can work. While I am in the cosmos, I am the light of the cosmos." Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay from the spittle and anointed his eyes with the clay and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means, when interpreted, sent forth. So he went and washed and came back with sight. So the neighbours and those who earlier had seen him and seen that he was a beggar said, "Is this not the one who was sitting and begging?" Some said, "This is he." Others said, "No, but he resembles him." But that man said, "I am he." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" That man answered, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So, going and washing, I saw." And they said to him, "Where is that man?" He says, "I do not know."
Good morning. Good morning to you. For those I've not met, my name is Matt. I go here. I'm not anything particularly special, but so it's good to meet you. See, I'm special like everybody else. It's good to be with you. So I want to talk about light this morning. Christ as the light of the cosmos, or the light of the world, as you probably are used to hearing that verse. I do apologise to Jackie, like I do probably most times, that I inflict her with my particular translations of the Bible. But I do like translations to be pretty sort of literal, and often they read quite weird when you translate them pretty literally like that. But you capture the strangeness of the New Testament, which I really like. But I want to talk about light. So what I want to suggest to you is that light is both obvious and mysterious, right? There's few things that we, maybe nothing, that we take more for granted than light. Maybe air, the air that we breathe, we take more for granted. I don't know how you'd work that out. But we take light for granted. Light floods our homes each morning, and we don't really take much notice of it. I mean, except that it wakes us up, or that we get up because the light's coming and it's going to wake us up, whatever the case may be. But, you know, our routines are shaped around light. Most of us wake up sometime around light coming into our homes. So we pay attention to light in that sense. It shapes sort of the way that we live, when we wake up, when we go to sleep, that kind of thing. But that's pretty much it. And the appearance of light each morning seems just kind of obvious to us, such that we don't really have to pay much attention. But light is actually, light is strange to us as well, right? Very strange, in fact. Contemporary physicists are not entirely sure exactly what light is. Quantum physics depicts light as both a particle and a wave, but in a sense, it's neither of those things. It's almost like holding up a tin can through some light, and if you hold it in one orientation, it's like a rectangle. It casts a shadow of a rectangle. You hold it in another orientation, it casts a shadow of a circle. And so the can is, you change the position and, it looks different. In a sense, it's both a rectangle and a circle, but actually it's neither, right? And light is the same. It's a particle and a wave, but it's also neither. And when we seek to measure light, we can only measure its speed or its position, but not both. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to bother. Yeah. So, yeah, the double slit experiment. No, we're not going to do that right now. So, where was I up to? What am I talking about? So, we can only measure the speed or the velocity or the position of light, not both. When you measure its position, it acts like a particle down the bottom. And so you can determine where the particle is, but when you measure the speed, it acts like a wave. And so you can determine the velocity of the light, but you can't determine the position, because the more that light acts like a particle, the less it acts like a wave, and the more it acts like a wave, the less it acts like a particle. And so you can never catch it in sort of both states is the wrong word, but both states. You can never catch it in both at the same time. So the result is you can know where light is, where the particle is. You can know the speed of the wave, but you can never know both at the same time. And this is one fundamental aspect of quantum physics. That'll do. But talking about the speed of light or the velocity of light, when travelling through a vacuum, like space, light travels just short of 300,000 kilometres per second. It takes 8 minutes for light to travel from our sun to the Earth. I was going to say each morning. That doesn't make any sense. Light is always travelling towards the Earth anyway. But what's weird about the speed of light, apart from the fact that it's crazy fast, is that physicists call this the constancy of the speed of light. And that means that light always travels at that speed of just shy of 300,000 kilometres a second, regardless of the inertia of the observer. Okay, what does that mean? In other words, say 1 billion kilometres away, there's a light source, and the light that it radiates is travelling toward you. It doesn't matter if you're moving 1 million kilometres an hour towards it or away from it. When you measure the speed of light relative to you, it's still the same. Very, very strange. Now, this might not make much sense to the non-physicists among us, me included, but even if we don't worry about any of that, we just think about our daily kind of experience of light, it's still mysterious. You can't hear light, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it. And you can see it, kind of, but we have no idea what it is, and yet without it, we wouldn't see anything at all. We see things because of light, including light itself. Now, when John records Jesus saying, "I am the light of the cosmos," or "I am the light of the world," I'm quite sure he didn't have all these quantum physical discoveries about light in mind, right? How could he? He's a first century person. Quantum physics is barely a century old. And yet, I think that the scriptures are more than the intended meaning of the author. I think that what is revealed to us in Scripture is inexhaustible in its depth. And, I think these observations, these discoveries about light that we make, even in the contemporary world, can still hold relevance to the way that we think about these revelatory things that Christ says to us. At the very least, Christ as light of the world is both obvious and mysterious. Obvious in the sense that he enters the world and does these great works like the one in this story. But also mysterious in that Jesus is more complex than any person can possibly fathom. Jesus can't be measured. He can't be put in a box. He can't be controlled. When we think we have him pinned down, I actually originally wrote nailed down. I thought, no, that's not right. Although, when we think we have him nailed down, he surprises us again and again. That's what I wanted to say, which is true, right? Both literally and figuratively speaking. But in other words, Jesus is strange to us. Jesus is strange to us. Even at the end of the reading today, I love this. These little details I just think are great. When the blind man is asked, where is Jesus? All he can say is, I don't know. Those who see Jesus don't necessarily understand him, much less control him. They certainly don't know everything about him. He is, as he tells us, he is like light. Though we can see it, we cannot necessarily understand it. And when we understand something about it, when we learn something about it, rather than thinking, we shouldn't think that we have mastery of it. Like light, when we learn something about it, that makes us go, man, there's a whole lot more about this that I don't know. And we realize the depths that we don't understand. And this reminds me of a passage from the end of Dante's Divine Comedy. You just have to bear with me with some poetry for a bit. Hopefully that's readable for people, but let me read this to you. This is from the end of the Divine Comedy. If you know the Divine Comedy, it's in 3 sections. This is from the Paradiso, or the paradise part of it. So Dante's in paradise. He says this: Eternal light, you sojourn in yourself alone. Alone you know yourself. Known to yourself, you, knowing, love and smile on your own being. When my eyes had watched it with attention for some time, deep in itself, it seemed, as painted now in those same hues, to show our human form, at which my sight was set entirely there. So I searched that strange sight. I wished to see the way in which our human form suited the circle that is God and found place in it. And my own wings were far too weak for that. But then my mind was struck by light that flashed, and with this light received what it had asked. All powers of high imagining here failed. But my desire and will were turned as wheels that move in equilibrium by love that moves the sun and the other stars. All powers of high imagining here failed, he says. John's story does something similar in that it reminds us of the way in which Christ is a profound mystery to us. Though he is with us, he is nonetheless strange to us, such that our imaginations can hardly fathom him. And indeed, I want to suggest to you that the greatest abuse of Jesus in our culture is not those atheists who try to disprove Jesus or whatever. I don't really meh. I mean, the bigger abuse is those believers who act as if they understand everything about him and who have nothing to learn and nowhere to grow. Christ becomes an object at that point, a weapon to be used on others, only confirming their own inclinations rather than breaking open new possibilities. For Christ, our light is not just something we see, like an object, like a tiger or a bacteria, something you can study. Right? Christ is not just something we see. Christ is the light by which we see. And just as light is the mystery that makes us see all other physical things, Christ is the mystery that illuminates everything else. That's a fairly obvious theme in John's the story that we've read this morning. The passage involves a man born blind being made to see. That is, he's able to see because of Jesus, the light of the cosmos. Meanwhile, Jesus' opponents, especially, it's a long passage actually, and we didn't read it all, but as you go on in the story, Jesus' opponents shut themselves off from that light, thus being unable to see. It's not just a story about a physical healing of someone's eyes. John is an incredibly subtle writer. Even here, I don't think it's a terribly subtle point actually, but throughout his gospel, he's a subtle writer, and there's something metaphorical usually going on with these stories. Yes, a blind man, his eyes are healed, he's able to see. But it's not a story just about healing, it's a story about seeing in a figurative sense, right? A metaphorical sense. Not merely seeing the physical world like the blind man, but seeing truth and beauty and goodness, being able to see God. Now, why was the blind man willing to see or able to see Jesus when... why was the blind man able to see when Jesus' opponents were not? What is the reason for that? Well, Gail O'Day, a theologian, in her book, The Word Disclosed, suggests this. I don't have this on screen, I apologise. She says this story is a dramatic embodiment of the clash between comfort and risk, between closed categories and open possibilities in the encounter with Jesus. The man born blind has nothing to lose in the encounter with Jesus, and so is open to who Jesus is and what Jesus has to offer. The Pharisees, in contrast, have much to lose and therefore much to protect, and they fight to maintain their known world. That resonates, I think, with what I said earlier about the greatest abuse of Jesus being by believers who have nothing new to learn. Such people already have an edifice that they've built up that they have to protect. That edifice might be ideological, it might be their theology, and they have to defend it at all costs. It might be material. They might be the kind of people, maybe they lead a popular church or a popular ministry, maybe they have a successful business, maybe they hoard large amounts of wealth, I don't know. Maybe they live in such a way that, they want to protect their way of life. Whatever. But when we already have an edifice that we've built up, I don't think we're going to be able to see. If we come to Jesus with everything already worked out, or with a way of life or thinking that we have to protect at all costs, we're not going to be able to perceive the light. Such things will be like a shield that we construct around ourselves that keeps the light out. And, the light might find its way in certain cracks, depending on the nature of the edifice, of the nature of the shield. But we'll keep the light out. at least to some degree. One possible way that this is teased out in John's story is when the disciples ask, Rabbi, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, that was a theological question that was probably a pretty lively debate in Jesus' time. And it even continues in certain circles today. But there is a false choice presented. Either the sin of the man or his parents led to the man's disability, his blindness. Because apparently, the only explanation for such things is people's sin. That's it. And the danger here is seeing the world according to what we think we already know. And Jesus' response blows that false choice apart. It was no one's sin that was responsible for the man's blindness. In fact, it's not even really said why the man was blind, but only that from this situation, God's works will be revealed. And here we see Jesus casting his light on a question in order that people might see more clearly, beyond the false choices and lack of imagination so common in this world. The man and his parents are not to blame for his disability. Now, by way of a small tangent, that is important in our current context where some Christians still attribute physical maladies to people's sin. And now, sure, sometimes our poor behaviours lead to physical ailments, of course, right? But I've had friends with cancer told to get rid of the sin in their life by well-meaning but rather deluded Christians. Anyway, off that tangent. There is something to be said here about the way we are often hoodwinked into believing that there's only two choices on complex issues. Christians end up being cut down the same dividing lines as everyone else in our culture. You're either a progressive or a conservative. You're either left or right or whatever. Right? But the light of Christ, I think, helps us to avoid those false choices. Indeed, our commitment to some ideology might be the thing we are unwilling to lose, the thing that stops us from perceiving the light when it shines. When the light of the cosmos shines, however, our first response must be to come before Christ humbly, knowing that we don't know. Knowing that we don't really understand the way things are. Knowing that we don't really understand the light itself. Only then will we see the light and then see all things by the illumination of the light. So friends, let's not simply assume that we see according to the light, just because you're a believer or something like that. We have to turn our eyes again and again back to the source of the light. It's only then that we can be given the gift of sight. And perhaps, in turning our eyes not to false choices, but rather to the mystery of the light that is Christ, the church too will fulfill its vocation, proclaimed in the scriptures as the light. For Christ himself said, "You are the light of the world." A city built on a hill cannot be hid. People don't light a lamp and put it under the bushel basket. Rather, they put it on the lampstand and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This, folks, is the good news. The light of life has come into the world. There is a means by which to see. may we find ourselves healed by that light, able to see clearly, and may we find ourselves as reflections of that light, casting light into the world. Amen.